Meraweka, nananiat sa Kate Pewenofkit Briner, Nase Namawaipa, Guema Ada, Desanisha Dene, Fort Worth Naitana, Totenka Nakanikat, Nanach Namanet sa Pewenofkitna, Desa Masitna, Desa Chalapana, Desa Haina, Desa Bigmana. Today I'm going to be talking about Niwūnū. We are talking or rebuilding community online. And to begin with, I told you who I am, who my people are, and that I'm Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache. Let's get started. Meiko. To get started, let's talk a little bit about Comanche, or Namarequap as we call it. It is in the northern Uto-Aztecan family in the central Namik group, with Shoshone, our sister language. And if you notice this gray by itself, this is us in Oklahoma, and we came out of the Great Basin onto the Great Plains, and this is where we ended up in 1875 when the last of the Comanche people came onto the reservation. It's also important to explain about my positionality. This is a picture from 1906 of my great-great-grandmother Maddie Pewenofkit and her sister cousin Mabel Mesite. Mabel is in the chair and Maddie is sitting on the arm of the chair. And this is a picture of their graduation from the Methvin Institute, a residential school. And the experience at this school led Maddie to make a strategic decision that when she had children, that she would not teach them Comanche. This is Baldwin Pewenofkit, Maddie's younger brother. He had epilepsy and so was not taken to residential or boarding school. He never learned English and he died in 1954. And here's a picture of the Pewenofkit hides, multi-generations here. My great-great-grandmother Maddie is right here, her brother Baldwin, and let's see, my great-grandmother and my grandmother, my kaku. In this picture, it's around 1950, and in this picture, only 2 people speak Comanche. This is me and my great-grandmother in 1979. My great-grandmother only knew isolated words and phrases, and come to find out years later, some of those were even not just Comanche, but Kiowa and Apache. But she encouraged me to connect with my language and my culture and to explore all the things that make us a people. And everything that I do is for this woman, and I hope that my work honors her. My adopted father, Ron Red Elk, who is the youngest brother of the youngest Comanche code talker, Dick Red Elk, in 2010 wrote this in one of our newsletters. And he asked these questions: where's that dedication to continue our traditions, talking about not using our language, but he ends it with Hina Ranahan Hutui, what are we going to do about it? And we've been asking this question for a long time. Now, the reason that Ron was asking this question, what are we going to do about it, is because if we look at the statistics from about 1854 to 1900 in the reservation era, Comanche people were multilingual people. Even if they didn't produce the other languages, they could understand them. So especially Comanche, Kiowa, Apache, English, Spanish, and then they could also use plain sign language to communicate with each other. And then that brings us into the 20th century. Casa Grande notes in 1940 there are approximately 2,400 Comanche people. Under 30 years of age, there's little to no Comanche. 30 to 60 years old, they are bilingual, and if they are 60 years or older, they are probably monolingual Comanche with little to no English. And if you remember that family, the multi-generational family picture, this pretty much holds true even for my family in 1950. Fast forward to today in 2024, and there are no longer any monolingual Comanche speakers. There are approximately anywhere from 5 to 10 first language speakers, and just a handful of adults of a childbearing age who can hold a conversation in Comanche. And this is a practical problem because the issue is rebuilding that community of speakers. And how do you do that in a way that makes sense to Comanche people and is effective? And that includes kind of creating a Comanche linguistics. The work I do in comparative studies allows me to look at different frameworks to bring them together in Indigenous critical theory and linguistics in order to create methods that work for my community to recreate a community of practice of speakers. And one of those is the 4 R's as written by LaDonna Harris in 2004 with her co-author. And so she's really looking at relationship, responsibility, reciprocity, and redistribution. And this idea that we have obligations as community members. So relationship is the kinship obligation. We live in a family that includes all creation. Responsibility is the community obligation. We have a responsibility to care for all of our relations or all of creation. Reciprocity is the cyclical obligation, and all things are circular and cyclical, and we have these very long dynamics and relational dynamics in flux, and thinking about that push and pull, and not everything's going to be equitable at times, but it's all going to work out in the end. And then redistribution is the sharing obligation, and we keep everything moving and in circulation, and the point of acquisition is to share. So we have this idea of giving away and giving resources to other people and not holding anything back. LaDonna Harris's 4 R's really tie into these 4 key principles of insurgent research by Adam Gaudry. And here, Gaudry is really trying to take on this idea of extractive research in academia, and trying to guide researchers to better action-oriented research that makes an impact in communities. So for Adam Gaudry, research is, number 1, grounded in, respects, and ultimately seeks to validate Indigenous worldviews. 2, geared toward use by Indigenous peoples and in Indigenous communities. 3, is ultimately responsible to Indigenous communities, and Indigenous communities are the final judges of the validity and effectiveness of insurgent research. And finally, 4, is action-oriented and works as a motivating factor for practical and direct action among Indigenous peoples and in Indigenous communities. So if we take the 4 R's of LaDonna Harris, the 4 key principles of insurgent research by Adam Gaudry, and then also take into account Dylan Miner's visiting methodology, or methodology of visiting, and this idea that the product, the end result, is not the important part, but it is the making together that is important. So that visiting aspect of it. And if you think about it in language, you're passing on language through visiting. And you're using the language, you are doing the language work with people, and yes, you may end up with final products such as a dictionary or a workbook, but really it's that aspect of doing the work together that is building the community as you move forward. With these frameworks in mind, there also needs to be a distinction between capital L linguistics and lowercase l linguistics, as pointed out by Wesley Leonard in 2018. With capital L linguistics, that is the scope, conventions, and epistemologies of the scientific study of language in the academic field called linguistics. And lowercase l linguistics is the scientific study of language, language documentation, language work, all those things that we do as community language workers. And this is an important distinction because capital L linguistics often dismisses social community concerns, and with language work, the focus should always be on rebuilding community, whether it's a community of practice, the community of speakers, and in a lot of cases, that's not the focus of capital L linguistics. And the focus on community in language work is very important because bringing together those frameworks, we often hear from people that the language is us, that we are the culture, the root of that. And if you notice here, Dustin says, to me, it's the very core of who we are as Comanches. If we call ourselves Comanches, it's all at the very root of that. That's where we come from. And in the first one, Guy says at the bottom, if you're doing this journey, you got all this information, you gathered it, you're the keeper of it now, you are the Comanche language. So there's this idea that language is us, that it is the culture, it's the genetics, it's the essence, that it is alive, and it is a gift from Creator. Here are two of the speakers that I work with the most. Rita Sapkat-Kuswoon is my cousin, and Geneva Womovoya Navarro, who has taught 5 classes a week with me for the last 5 years on Zoom. She's amazing. She's now 98 years old. Along with creating monolingual entries in our dictionary, we also have something that I like to call anecdotal entries or story entries. And so, for instance, Detsaya is basically to take leftovers, right? And Geneva one night said, it's to put something in your purse and take it, like a kaku. And a kaku is a grandma. And so they're notorious for wrapping things up in their napkins and putting it in their purse and taking it. Here's an example of intergenerational visiting to create resources for our community. A short story by Geneva and illustrated by myself and my kiddos.
Piamo pits onai gimano surakse uwana eko sura ina o gimaku u nape dom medjekui ei subetama.
Here we have another example of that anecdotal definition. Edwin Chapabidi was explaining the difference between a puku and a tahaya, which today often just gets defined as a horse. He says a puku is a horse that moves you, it's your horse, and a tahaya is a horse that moves, meaning it's just any horse. And with that previous example by Edwin and now this example with Ray, these are also both from archival materials and this idea of visiting with even these people in the archives. And here he's telling a story. He's mixing in Comanche, he's mixing in English, but he also has a chorus going. That's how they name things. Now our speakers should know all those things. Those things, that's what our elders name things. See, that's what our speakers should know. And so you can get this idea that he thinks it's very important that our speakers and our learners should know this. And this is also something that will be in the database. In conclusion, this is just a snippet view of the many layers of work that we are doing in our community to visit in the language and live the 4 R's. If you would like to see more of our work, use the QR code below to go to our ILDA database and dictionary hosted by the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma, who also live the 4 R's and share their infrastructure with others. You can also find us at ComancheLanguage.org. Era.